Welcome to the Beyond the Call Sheet podcast series, where we interview creatives and hear their journey working in the creative arts.
I'm Pandora Lennard and I'm an executive creative director.
Could you tell me about your early inspiration and what led you into the creative arts?
So when I was younger, I think I always used creativity as an outlet. If I was sort of bored or I'd kind of find things around the house, I'd scavenge, I'd make things from tinfoil, I'd make cards for people. I was always quite creative in school, but I always went to quite academic schools as well, so that was always prioritized. It was sort of, do you want to be a banker or a lawyer or a doctor? And if you wanted to do art, you had to be an artist. You had to be a classical kind of painter, and you had to go to art school. I think most of my year at school sort of went to Oxbridge, that was the thing, and otherwise you had to go and be a classical painter. So I didn't really know that there was a route into creative industries. I was kind of the editor of I was the fashion editor of the school magazine, and then I was editor of the school magazine, but again, I didn't know that that was a career choice. So by the time I was kind of picking my sort of GCSEs or whatever, which at 14 or 15 define your whole life, you think, your career path. I had no idea. And I ended up sort of choosing to study psychology, and I did quite sciencey things, but I still kept art at school. And then, by the time I was 18, I went to university in London. I went to UCL to do psychology. But I had kind of grown up in London, and it wasn't this university experience where it was going to kind of make or break me and life-changing. I kind of was a bit sort of dissatisfied, and I'd had a horrible breakup, and someone had said to me, a friend of a friend is working at Tank magazine. Why don't you take your mind off things, and why don't you go and intern there for the summer? So I did, and I turned up in sort of the most funky, fashion-forward outfit I could find. It was awful. It was like an American Apparel leotard, some horrible puffy, I think it was from Primark, sort of puffy skirt, and then stripper shoes, because I thought these look like the Yves Saint Laurent tribute shoes. These look as, high fashion as I could kind of wrap my head around. And I started there, and I worked the summer, and it was just crazy, so fun. I felt so cool, and just, blown away. And by the end of the summer, they sort of said, do you want a job here? Do you want to be, I think it was junior fashion assistant or something. And I dropped out of university, and that was kind of the start of it.
How long did you work at Tank magazine?
I was at Tank for about 4 years in total. I worked my way up from, interning to fashion assistant to whatever. I ended up sort of fashion editor by the end of it. But it was my education. The whole thing was my university education, that 4 years. And I was given the owner of the magazine, Masood, and Caroline Issa, who was running it as well, just gave me so much trust and gave me, when I look back now at some of the first shoots that I did, they were so embarrassing. I just didn't have, any cultural references at that point. I hadn't built out my own identity yet. So I wondered, how did people get all these ideas for mood boards? Where did all the ideas come from? And I was so frustrated that I didn't know, how you get there. So I came up with these ideas that were really kind of base, obvious ideas, and they just let me do them. They let me run with them, and I kind of built my confidence and my taste levels. What did I like? It was an education in learning what did I like and what did I not, what was my opinion. And as a kind of company structure, it was a magazine, but it was also a creative agency, and Masood had come from an ad agency background. So I kind of had the luxury of getting to do, fashion weeks and, shoots for the magazine, but also understanding the kind of under the bonnet of what the industry was like, how advertising worked, how you worked with brands, how you could make money from publishing, as publishing was kind of really declining. People weren't buying magazines, so everyone was looking for alternative ways to sort of source income from fashion, kind of moving. There was no online, there was no Days Digital, there was no, so we were kind of really on our feet trying to figure out how to innovate, and it was such a good learning ground for that. They worked with, amazing clients like Swarovski and Westwood and Paul Smith, and, worked a lot in China as well. And all of that was just, an absolute education. And I think, after 4 years, I'd reached the point where I'd gotten everything I kind of had to learn, and I was sort of quite rebellious, and, it was time to kind of do my own thing. I'd started to get work off the back of sort of editorials that I'd done, or, people had liked the casting that I'd done, and I started to get clients, like record labels or brands, asking for me to work with them. And I decided, I think it was about 23, I decided to go freelance.
How was your experience working as a freelancer, and what opportunities did that bring?
So I've been doing sort of freelance creative for about a year, and I think I'd realised that I wasn't just styling things. I was really creative directing, whether it was a band or it was a brand campaign. I was art buying, so I was pulling in the teams, I was styling it, and I started to come up more and more with the sort of strategy behind the campaign as well. So I had a little bit more control on set or over the teams that were being picked, and I had spent about 6 months in America kind of building, just really making money. It was just a really great place to go as an English person, be really valued for all the experience that you'd had in London where you'd made no money, and you were kind of in a huge pool of people. And, I went to America and it was, wow, everyone thought you were kind of really shiny and special. And I worked with lots of kind of girl bands, like Camilla Cabello and Fifth Harmony, Little Mix, like all these kind of like young girl bands, because I was that age. And I came back to London, with a bit of money in my pocket and sort of thinking about what I wanted to do next. And I was shooting, lots of campaigns, doing casting, and I had lots of assistants or friends at the time that I just thought were really cool. And every time I came up with a campaign idea, I thought, if we're casting something for a skate brand, why are we getting models? Why don't we actually get a skater? I know this really cool girl, or we're looking for someone who's a bit rocky for this ad campaign, like, it's Couples or something they want. And that kind of idea of, using people, like, part of it was me helping out my mates. It was, here's really cool people that I believe in, why aren't they getting a shot? And part of it was this frustration that I had that, like, there was this veneer in the fashion industry. We were kind of selling things to people by people that weren't really authentic, and it just struck like a discord with me. And I got a bunch of my friends to sort of turn up to some of the castings. I didn't say, I knew them. I just said, turn up to your casting, tell them you're a new model and you've forgotten your book, but go in there and talk to them. Don't just sort of say, nice to meet you, I'm from this agent, and drop your book and stand there silently. I said, go in and say, here's my name, this is what I do, I'm a student here, I'm studying this, in my free time I do this. And they did, and they just kept getting the jobs. So it happened so fast. About 3 weeks later, there was a girl that was working with me, and we just sort of said together, like, why don't should we just build a website? Should we just do this officially? And we got, all the friends that I knew, my hair and makeup friends, these twins, Danielle and Nicole Kalani, and photographers, Olivia Richardson, and we just did a day where we shot everyone, and we did everything on Polaroid and put it up. And a week later, I had a call. I was out in Soho, and I had a call from the Evening Standard, and they said, we've heard that you're doing an alternative modelling agency, and we really like the sound of it. We're thinking about it for the cover of the ES magazine. Do you want to chat? And it happened so fast that it was just, I didn't even really have time to process how cool it was. I was just like, wow, okay. I hadn't opened an LLC or LLP, I hadn't officially opened it as a company, didn't have a bank account, didn't have an office. They asked to come and shoot us in our office, and I hustled together, a shop nearby that let us pretend it was their office. And it just blew up from there. And I really loved the idea for me that just taken something that felt really intuitive to me, like a no-brainer, that was really, against the system of how things had always been done. And throughout my career, that's always been the sort of linear theme of, what do I do? It's a bit rebellious, it's a bit antagonistic, it's a bit bold. And that was what anti-agency was. And I just, it was my baby. It was still one of the things that I'm most proud of. And all of that, part of my kind of journey in the industry up until then, all the things I was frustrated about, the cliquiness or the, lack of access or the sort of lack of democratization of it. Certain people got to say this model's going to be big. I wanted it to be, open to everyone. And to see it take off in that way was just, mind-blowing. I don't think I would have done it without Lucy, who was my partner at the time. I'm such a perfectionist, and I could have held off on the idea for about a year, building the perfect website and the perfect, business model. And I think part of what made it so successful was just the naivety of it and the sort of sheer belief that that was the way that things should be going. Yeah. All the other agencies hated us.
How did Anti-Agency evolve as an agency?
So Anti-Agency had obviously blown up, and we'd opened it, we'd opened sort of branches in New York, in LA, and we were starting to get commissions by brands to do content for them, or basically act as a creative agency. We did a launch for, I think, Baby G, we did stuff with Nasty Gal, and I really loved the just the creative direction side of it and the strategy side of it, I think, more than I loved being an agent. It's a lot to sort of be a manager and kind of manage many people, so having lots of kids at once. So I was kind of hungry to go back to that side of it. And me and Lucy parted ways, and she held on to the business. And I sort of started thinking, okay, what's next? And I think because I'd had this experience, suddenly I'd leveled up. I wasn't just a creative with creative experience, on set. I was an entrepreneur. I was a business person. I understood finances. I understood contracts. My skill set had leveled up. And because of that, I became much more kind of valuable in other parts of the industry. So I started to get headhunted for corporate jobs. I did, I think, about 2 years at Topshop. I did sort of contract work at ASOS for about 2 years. And I was at Shein most recently in 2024 for a year. And I think that corporate experience was just a whole nother level. It was, how do you take all of these creative skill sets that you've got and use them for a brand? It's not about your creativity and your creative outlet. It's about taking a commercial strategy or a set of needs and translating those into something that's creative and feels authentic and feels natural and feels fun. And for me, I loved that because it was like psychology. How do we get, here's the strategy, people aren't buying because of this reason. How do we counteract that? And how do we do it in a fun way? But it was definitely a learning curve on, going from freelance to going to an office environment, a corporate environment, a global corporate environment. You're dealing with so much internal politics, so many teams with different KPIs. Marketing team has different success measures to creative team, has different success measures to digital. So I think what I learned the most was just how to work at a really senior level, at a board level or a director level, and I guess manage the politics of that. You're all people at the end of the day sat in a room, but you've all got goals or pressure on you to achieve different things. And it was really about, managing those relationships and managing big teams underneath you. Sometimes teams of 50 to 80 people. Sometimes if you include e-commerce, sometimes 200. Huge teams. And really how do you apply creativity in a commercial context? How do you keep it alive when, you've got data against you? The period I started working in corporate was the period where you could measure, all the posts. And, it wasn't about your creative intuition. It was about data. And what I learned was, how do you blend the two? How do you blend the two? And also, data is, as much as we're scared of, data in fashion, you can take data and make it work for you. That's what I learned. Everyone takes data and makes it work for them. You can work creatively, even with data. And that was a real pleasure as well. It was just a new way to kind of harness it, be boundaried with it. How do I package this in a way that people who aren't creative can understand it? how can I teach them the value of each person's individual role, why they're worth this much money, why we need this videographer or this photographer because they have a cultural capital. It was really, trying to take people that speak in data and numbers and teach them about, sort of like intuitive creativity and organic trends. And that was just, for me, for my brain, it was like this combination of who I was, like sort of academic and, business-minded, but also really creative. That was kind of how I ended up doing corporate world.
What are the advantages of working within a corporate structure?
The move to go from these kind of really creative pursuits that I'd had, working at a magazine, interning, doing my own business, they were all quite sort of like fun, like creativity fueled outlets, and they were really, I guess like a learning curve for me. And while I was like absorbing information and culture and community and networks of people, but I reached a point where I think like my goals that I'd had when I was younger of what it looked like to reach the top in this industry, when I was around 30, it changed a lot. I realized that, especially, depending on what background you come from, you can't always work for, a publishing, like a magazine salary. You can't always work on a freelance salary. And I needed to think strategically about what I wanted, where I wanted to be in 5 or 10 years. I wanted to, buy a house. I wanted to have like a certain level of security. And I didn't see that happening through the creative industry that I'd known up until that point. So when I got headhunted or when I started looking at corporate jobs, it felt like this way of, I'd seen certain routes in the industry. You're a fashion stylist, you become an editor, you work your way up at a magazine to sort of senior editor or director, and then you might get consulting with a sort of luxury brand off the back of that, and that's your payoff for all of your work that you've done, for all your education, for all your proving yourself. And I think I wasn't kind of really traditionally accepted, I'd say, like in the kind of really elite sort of luxury fashion world. And I couldn't afford to stay in it, to be honest. So when I got these kind of corporate jobs where the salaries were suddenly, I'd never imagined that I could make that much money. And there have been points where I've been, for a female, I've been, the top 2% of female earners in the UK. And that's something I'm so proud of. But there was a lot of like shame and stigma around leaving luxury fashion, or what was, really at, the sort of epicenter of cool, and moving into something more corporate or more commercial. Suddenly you were high street, it was less well respected by that sort of era of fashion that I'd grown up in. And for me, it was kind of about growing up and realizing actually this level that we kind of, is actually kind of where everyone's ending up, getting to like a global level. When businesses are really successful, or magazines, they're aiming to be global, household names, they're aiming to, that's what really we're all sort of working towards. And I realized that for me, there was a way to kind of skip the traditional route and go direct. And financially and, in my kind of strategy of my life, that was what made sense. It was what worked for me.
From your perspective, how has the industry changed over the years?
The industry's changed in ways that no one in it at any point could have possibly imagined. When I started, it was publishing. They were the gatekeepers to everything. And that became digital, and, digital became social media. And, it went from a few people who had a cultural taste that they'd sort of explored or built for themselves, who I think in a lot of great ways guided people to things that were, culturally relevant and interesting, but it was gatekeeping. And the rise of kind of the internet and social media and influencers meant that everything kind of became more democratized, and everyone was really excited by that because suddenly anyone could make a brand, anyone could be a photographer. It was really exciting. And that was like a great time, but a real sort of struggle for the traditional fashion industry. Especially for fashion brands as well, you could make, anyway, it was all kind of changing. And I think where we're at now is this other kind of huge change of AI. I personally, I'm a nerd, and I love AI, and I use it constantly. And the way that it has changed, the way that I work. I've been using it probably for about 3 years properly. And now a lot of the consulting I do is, okay, how do we bring this into workflow systems? How can we use it creatively? Can we use it for campaigns? Can we use it for e-com? And it's something that I'm really interested in. And I think, like, it's AI is made by and from humans, and it's as flawed as we are. And the way that you use it, can make it great or not. And I think it's frightening because it risks a lot of people's jobs. There are a lot of things when you're looking at it from a strategic level or a financial level where you think the cost savings of using AI are huge commercially. But I don't think that means that everyone has to be terrified, because I think it's still so new and it's still so plastic. When you're programming AI or you're saying, I want to create this shoot or this, it still comes down to the same thing that it came down to at 20, which is, what are your cultural references? What are your prompts? A prompt is just a cultural reference. So what are you putting in to get something out? And it can be a really creative process. It can be all of your, experience into that prompt. And for me, it's given me the ability to, upskill in so many areas that I wish I'd trained to, do certain things. I work with amazing videographers, photographers, all of these things. But as a creative, without having studied all of those things, I can't do them. So for me, with my brain, it's given me the capacity to literally create and envision what's in my brain in a way that I never used to be able to do. So for me, that's great. And I think I'd kind of encourage creatives to use it, whether it's for that or whether it's you're creative and you're terrible at your taxes, you don't know how to write a contract, you've never worked with a commercial brand before, you're trying to cold call someone. It really, especially if you're dyslexic or ADHD, it really helps with those things, I think. You can also end up in a burnout, spinning out about it, and, it is flawed because it's us, and, right now the image generation is, racist and sexist. There's a lot wrong with it. But I think the way it's changing things, even the legality around it, models, having twins, there are things where I think about, especially with models, the amount of labor that goes into it, the working conditions, the traveling, the effect on your mental health. I wonder whether actually it's not the worst thing in the world to have a digital twin if you own it and you can choose where it goes. So I think it's really interesting that we're at this point where it can happen. And I don't think, like anything, social media, the democratization of trends and influencers is also dying out. As soon as people realize this influencer is trying to sell me this product, it doesn't matter that they have 500,000 followers or, they're selling me something. People don't like it anymore. And I think it's coming back to this idea of who are the cultural tastemakers and who sort of should say kind of what's next. And it's come back to kind of something intuitive, and it feels contradictory to say that you can use technology to help with that, but I think that you can. My capacity to, if I think a trend is coming and I've seen it and I talk to AI about it and I say, okay, give me the statistics on it, what studies have there been, I'd never have that level of access before. So for me, it's a way of taking my creativity and my intuition and validating it, proving it, translating it into terms that people from other industries can understand, and also just creating with it. So for me, it's exciting. And I think these cycles of magazines, influencers, now AI, they have a lifespan. We get very excited by them, and then we realize their flaws and they die out, and we move on to something else, and we take the best of it and we leave the worst of it. So I don't think it's anything to be, as a creative, it's another phase. And I think if you're a creative, you have to be used to innovating and adapting. I've had, I can tell, maybe 5 different careers, and I've had to learn different skill sets each way and change careers depending on how the industry's changed. So I don't think a shake-up is a bad thing, actually. I think it can teach you to evolve.
What are the main challenges of being a freelance creative, and what advice would you give to young creatives starting out today?
The main challenges of being a freelance creative, sometimes they stay the same throughout your career, and sometimes you come up with new ones, I think, as the industry changes. So about a year ago, decided to leave doing corporate, and I find myself back in this situation where I'm freelance again. And although I'm coming at it from a different angle, I'm now a consultant, I'm an advisor, I'm more strategic, more top level. You still have the same identity crisis of who am I and what am I trying to sell, or what am I trying to say about myself? And I remember being, early 20s and trying to put together my first tear sheet portfolio. And it was the same thing, this just identity crisis of which of these images really represent me. How much say have I had in them? I've got a lot of work where I look at it and I think, oh, well, that's really impressive, but was that really creatively me, or was that a commercial job? So balancing that out, how much is you, how much is work that you've done that's sort of impressive, and how much is who you want to be. So whether I was, 20 or nearing 40 now, I kind of find myself in the same sort of identity crisis, I guess. And I think what's helpful, I can design, because I've done so much branding, I could make a website for myself in 50 different directions. I could make a luxury one, I could make a Gen Z one, I could make you ask it. But really coming back to the heart of, who am I and how do I want to work? I don't want to do a 9 to 5 anymore, working on the same things year after year. I don't want to do seasonal fashion, it's spring, summer again. It's, all of that felt way too sort of cyclical, and my brain just needed constant newness and freshness, and that's what excites me. So I think being a freelance creative, you're balancing, how do I make money? How do I do that off of what I've done already? How do I continue to sort of creatively explore at the same time and show people where I want to go? And I think I try to look at it now. I speak to a lot of my friends who are photographers, and say, what does your website look like? I look at production ones, I look at, strategy ones, I look at creative, everyone has a different thing, and it's very hard to tie your work together and unite it when some of it's been for money and some of it's been for you and some of it you're really embarrassed by because it's old or, just a mistake. How do you find yourself in curating all of this? And I'm still managing that. I don't have a website. I don't have, I've got a LinkedIn that tells you everything I've done. And for me, it's going back to that, okay, I used to have this leather portfolio. How does it look now? If I do a website, and do I need that? I think there was a part of me that wanted to be like, look, I've done this for so long, people should just know what I do. And actually, you are constantly changing what you do, and how your skill set and what you're interested in is constantly changing. So you kind of do need to show people, and you can't, be too scared to do it in the moment, because by the time you've figured it out, you've changed again. So you really do just have to put yourself out there. And it's okay to keep changing it. And, it's okay if not everything looks perfect together or it doesn't make sense. You are the unifying thing across all the work you've done. You're the unifying thing. So what is it about you that you want to put into your portfolio or into your website? I've never liked self-branding. I never wanted to be a street style star. Talking on camera is so awkward for me. But I think if you can narrow down to yourself what are a couple of words that define you or your work or what you care about, that is the unifying concept across your portfolio or across your work. And you can talk to people about, there's a little bit of this, for me, okay, here's something I did that was about diversity. That's something I care about. This was about, putting together an amazing team, like a grassroots community or a sort of cultural curation. And for me, I think the things that have tied me together, like my sort of career together, has always been being a little bit rebellious, loving kind of, authenticity and people, and not in a tokenistic way, but really just loving people and their creativity and connecting with them. And then my own weird, creativity and cultural bank of ideas that has just, that's taken years to build. My weird niches of like film directors or music or sculptors that I like. I think when I was young, I was so confused about how people had such a strong creative identity. And I didn't realize that, if all you've got is time, if you don't have the job yet and you don't have, no one's believing in you yet and you haven't found your team to work with and you're sitting there doing nothing on your couch every day, not feeling productive, that is time that you can, especially with the internet now, I was looking at music on LimeWire, go and look up every film director, watch every film, listen to every weird type of music, explore, like branch out beyond what you know, because that time, when you're busy and when you're working hard, and especially when you're working for money, you have so little time to do creative research and to build your creative identity. And the luxury of, starting out is that you're building that for yourself and you've got the time to do it. So, I think my advice to young creatives is like, it's okay to be on the journey building yourself up and keep doing that when you've got time to. Don't listen if people don't accept you into their world. Create your own teams and your own world, and just make sure that it's dense and that you really stand behind it. And you can only do that when you've found exactly what you like and what your taste is, and you can really back it confidently.
Thanks for watching or listening to Beyond the Call Sheet. I hope you found it interesting, and if you'd like to be notified of the next episode, then don't forget to subscribe or like. Thank you.